Hi everybody, welcome back to the Green Chemistry Education webinar series hosted by Beyond Benign and the Green Chemistry Commitment. My name is Amy Cannon. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Beyond Benign, a nonprofit dedicated to green chemistry education in K-12 through higher ed. This webinar series is designed to highlight relevant topics in green chemistry for faculty and students who are looking to adopt green chemistry in their courses and programs. So welcome back. As always, we're broadcasting live and recording the session, so all attendees are in listen-only mode and all lines are muted. If you have a question at any point during the broadcast, please type it into the question or chat box on your control panel, and we'll have a look and we will respond to as many questions as we can after the presentation by Marty. The recording will be posted on the link that you see here in the welcome box and also on this PowerPoint slide. And supporting documents such as the presentation slides will also be posted on that link as well. For those of you who participate in social media, please connect with us on Twitter or Facebook, and we'd love to hear some live tweeting going on. So here's our Twitter handle and hashtags. Thank you so much for joining us and taking part in the conversation today. So the webinar is being brought to you as part of the Green Chemistry Commitment Program, which is a consortium program aimed at transforming chemistry education, expanding the community of green chemistry practitioners, and affecting systemic change in chemistry education. The program is a voluntary, flexible program for adopting green chemistry student learning objectives and for promoting the work that you're already doing at your institution and that can serve as models for others to get involved with green chemistry as well. You can find more information on our website here that's posted on this slide, and you can also email our higher ed program manager directly, Derek Ward, right here at derek_ward@beyondbenign.org. And as always, as part of the webinar series, we give away a green chemistry book at the conclusion of the webinar. We randomly select a winner from our list of attendees. Those of you who showed up for this webinar, and we'll randomly select and announce that at the end, and we'll get that book right out to you. Okay, with that, we're very happy to have Dr. Marty Mulvihill here to join us for a discussion about his company, Safer Made, and their role in advancing green chemistry. So I'm just going to introduce him briefly and then hand over the slides. And again, any questions that come up during Marty's presentation, please do type them right into there to the question box. Okay, so Marty's a general partner and co-founder at Safer Made. Prior to Safer Made, he received his PhD in chemistry from UC Berkeley, and then he went on to co-found and be the executive director of the Berkeley Center for Green Chemistry. He's a very respected name in the green chemistry community. He has worked with many Fortune 500 companies in the personal care, construction, electronics, and apparel industries to help them replace hazardous chemicals with safer alternatives. He's developed technologies that help provide access to clean drinking water in the developing world and created new approaches for the design of safe bio-based materials. And he's also contributed significantly to the green chemistry education community as well. So with that, I am going to hand the controls over to you, Marty. And there you go. Hopefully
excellent.
It's coming over to you.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, everyone, for being on the webinar today. It's a real pleasure to come back and talk to you all, to connect with Amy and the Green Chemistry Commitment. It's one of the things that we accomplished during my time at Berkeley that I'm really proud of. You know, through the Green Chemistry Commitment and really the support of the green chemistry community, we were able to redo our undergraduate labs, and you know, I'm proud to say that undergrads at Berkeley still learn green chemistry when they come through the introductory chemistry courses, which is just awesome, especially because a lot of those folks don't go on to become chemists. They go on to do a lot of other great things. You know, now I hope that what they do is go on and start companies that Safer Made can invest in. But I really do appreciate the hard work of everyone at the Green Chemistry Commitment, and really the collaborative nature of the green chemistry community. one of the most important things to me about this transition from academia into early stage investing is that I'm going from one very collaborative community to another. That's been one of the most pleasant realizations for me in the past few years, transitioning out of academia and into the world of investments. So what I want to do today is tell you a little bit about what that world of investments looks like, especially at the intersection of safer chemistry and consumer products, and tell you a little bit about how Adrian and I, the two partners here at SaferMade, go about thinking about and supporting companies that are creating solutions to safer chemistry for our consumer products. So, there we go. As I'm sure many of you on this call have noticed, the aisles in the grocery store are changing. There are new brands popping up. There are people doing just as this woman is and reading ingredient labels. And all of this is creating an opportunity to move safer and bio-based chemistry onto the market. If you take a look at things like the growth in organic food over the past 15 years, they're radically changing what people are buying. And when you ask people why they're buying these things, they're buying them primarily because they think they are better for themselves and their family. And while preventing environmental pollution and avoiding the use of extractive industries is certainly a part of what we do, we think that the key differentiator here, the key thing that's shaping what shows up on your store shelves, we think the key thing is consumer demand for products that are safer. And so how do these products get to the shelf? One of the things that's important is that if you ask any retailer or large brand, they know that their consumers are looking for things that are safer. Now, they often also have a list of 10, 12 things that they know that they would like to kind of phase out or move towards in terms of safer chemistry. So the big question is, are there companies out there that are providing the solutions that are needed today? And sometimes there are large companies that can provide some short-term solutions, but often you need to look to early-stage startups to really be providing and developing the solutions that we need to have safer products on our store shelves. And one of the things that's been extremely inspiring in the last 2 years since Adrian and I started SaferMade is to see that there are a ton of people out there working on it. When I think about the over 300 companies that we've talked to in the past 2 years, it's just more than I could have ever imagined while I was sitting at one institution, at UC Berkeley, for the previous 5 years. There's so much more work going on than I think many of us would give credit to. And I think part of it is when we stay within our little green chemistry community, we find a lot of chemists, we find a lot of folks who understand and think about the molecules that are involved in providing safer products. But the reality is there are a ton of people working on this, and not all of them know what green chemistry even is. So that's on us to give it to them in their undergraduate educations. But it's also a huge opportunity and a reason why I encourage everyone to really reach out beyond the chemistry community to look for people that are trying to develop, adopt, and commercialize safer materials. So finally, the reason why we're doing this, the reason why Adrian and I came together to start SaferMade is that we believe that the companies we invest in are not only providing the materials that go into future consumer products, but by growing and taking market share, they're actually going to be eliminating the use of harmful chemicals. They're going to be preventing pollution. They're going to be preventing degradation to the natural world, and they're going to be creating a positive vision for the future of chemistry. They're going to be creating healthier people cleaner waters, and more nourishing soils and environment. So this is already happening, and it's continuing to happen at a faster and faster pace. I keep updating this slide because brands that are being built on safety and sustainability continue to win and attract attention in the marketplace. So you have ones like Seventh Generation in Patagonia that have been around for a long time, leading on these messages of safety and sustainability. And then you have newer companies like Schmitz, which was acquired earlier this year by Unilever, and Native, another deodorant company that was acquired last year by P&G. And of course, Method was acquired just last year by SC Johnson. This shows you how interested, especially large companies, are in moving in this direction. And the fact that they recognize that sometimes the best way to do that is to create a new company, to create a new brand that can, from the ground up, do things right. So one of the reasons why we think, and we have heard, that these companies are being acquired by large conglomerates like P&G or Unilever, SC Johnson, is because they recognize that the brands that are built on this message from the beginning have the consumer trust and authenticity that they're looking for. And it's much easier to acquire them and bring that chemistry, bring that branding into their infrastructure than it is to try to build it on their own. And they do try to build it on their own as well, but it's an important touch point to show that there really is room for many more brands and many more startups focused on safer chemistry and consumer products. So what I hope to do today in the time that I have, especially given the mixed audience on this call, is talk a little bit about how it takes a whole system working together to improve consumer products. And startups aren't the only answer. Early stage finance isn't the only answer, but incumbent business and advocacy and government are similarly not the only answer. It takes all of these things kind of working together and kind of working in concert to really make a difference, really make an impact at an appreciable scale. And when I think about what our role as SaferMade is within this, clearly we're providing early stage finance, so we fit in that bucket well, but we also spend a lot of time mapping out innovation landscapes, talking to incumbent businesses, staying in touch with the NGOs that are driving demand in this space. Because a lot of what we can do as in some ways, a third party is validate and share information across this cycle where information doesn't always flow readily. So what I hope to do today is highlight, mostly through the textile sector, but highlight how we can play this role that connects the innovation landscape and startups to the world of finance that can eventually make a difference in the products that we make and that are being made by incumbent businesses. So when we think about what we're trying to accomplish, like I said earlier, we look at this in a very sector-by-sector approach. While many folks focused on harmful chemicals have tried to find out what are the largest volumes, what are the most harmful chemicals, should we focus on BPA or should we focus on phthalates or should we focus on preservatives? You know, our answer is that rather than focusing on the chemistry, focus on what function those chemicals are providing. So we work in each of these sectors. We work with leading brands to ask them, what are they looking for? What innovations in terms of materials and chemicals are they looking to adopt today? And when you talk to brand managers and product innovators in every one of these sectors, you get answers. They'll tell you what they're looking for, which is really interesting, and it's something that we hope to share and connect with the broader innovation community, investment community, through reports like we did in the textile space and like we're now working on in food packaging. So just to give you a scale for some of these opportunities and where they exist, there are already clearly articulated. These are all, you ask many brand managers, many developers in any one of those sectors that I talked about, these are clearly articulated innovation opportunities, many of which actually cut across some of those sectors I just showed you. And it gives you a sense that these are large markets. There's a huge opportunity here, and there's not going to be one solution. I think that's the other important takeaway from a slide like this, is there's not going to be one solution that eliminates all formaldehyde, or one solution that eliminates all bisphenol A or all PFASs. The solutions are going to be focused on the particular application, the particular function, and they're still going to be very large markets. And so that brings me to something that I've worked with many of you in the green chemistry community on, which is when we think about how do you move away from a chemical of concern and move towards a safer chemistry, it's critical to take a functional perspective. And if for no other reason, I'll make this argument, is that beyond chemists who use Aldrich and Strem and the likes to order chemicals to run their reactions, no one in the business world, no one who's making a product that you and I buy, buys chemicals. They buy function. They buy a solution to a problem they have. Oftentimes, those are mixtures of chemicals or materials, but when they think about them, they don't think about them the way you and I do, the chemists on the call. They think about them as something that fills a need in their manufacturing process or product. And so when we think about alternatives, we shouldn't think about chemicals either. We should think about function. And the important thing that does, and the important thing that teaches our young chemists, is to be able to move between scales, move between the ability to look at functional groups and look at chemical structures and understand how they affect function and how things are actually used in the real world. I think this functional perspective has a real opportunity to broaden and expand the way that we teach chemists to act as designers and conduits for information translators between function and chemistry. So, like I said, what does it mean? And this is what I want to talk to you about. What does it mean to take a functional approach? I think the first thing that it means, and I think that what we have to remember as chemists, is it means being a little humble. It means that we need to not pretend that we have all the answers, but we need to go talk to the leaders and figure out what the functions are that are needed. What's the innovation agenda that is set within any one of these industries? So, like I said, today I'm going to be talking to you mostly about textiles. And this is just some of the many, many companies that we talk to when we create our innovation agenda for the textile, safer chemistry in the world of textile and apparel. And we're talking to large retailers, foundations, leading brands, outdoor and other associations, and the chemical companies, and other folks doing finance and innovation within the space. So it's really taking all of those perspectives to come together with what functions are needed and what opportunities those have for creating safer chemistry. So the first thing that you find, and this is the very high level, and what we're going to do from here is dig into it, is that, like I said, they're going to share their problems, and their problems aren't always articulated in terms of chemistry, but we find that underlying changes to chemical processes and materials can often address other very large sustainability challenges. So this is to give you a sense of the textile sector in particular, and the scale and some of the big problems that they're trying to address. So in 2016, we were making, or there were over 62 million tons of textiles and made. which, you know, is roughly 30 billion t-shirts. And when you think about that within the context of the rough estimation of how much water it takes to make a t-shirt, you know, over 700 gallons, the two biggest drivers, I would say, in the sustainability of textiles, apparel are, one, that's just mass balance. How do we produce this amount of material and do so in a way that isn't going to create tremendous amounts of waste, and that can also be reused within the industry? So there's a big push right now, and a big theme among sustainability agendas in textile apparel is around the closed loop economy. How can you take back fibers, fiber waste, and turn it back into material? And that's to address this first big challenge of just the amount of both synthetic and natural fibers that are being used to create our apparel. And next to that, I would say the next on the list for folks is the water impact. There have been a number of studies citing not only the water consumption and water use in textile processing, but also that effect on surface waters. So the reality is a lot of effluent gets generated by the textile industry, and that effluent often ends up in freshwater, in surface water. And that means that textiles, especially in certain parts of Asia, are a major contributor to water pollution. And so between water pollution and reclaiming those materials, those are two of the grand kind of challenges within and motivators within this space. And it's important to think about those alongside the individual chemicals that are used. And as you can see here, there are quite a number of chemicals used within the textile and apparel industry to kind of meet this demand. And this is everything from surfactants and dyes to process aids and sizing agents, everything you need to create a garment. And so this isn't new. This has been going on for a while. And like I said, it's part of a larger ecosystem where these brands are feeling pressure from folks like the detox campaign at Greenpeace, their focus being on the water impacts in Asia, but also feedback from their customers, feedback from the retailers, feedback from their own internal sustainability team saying, hey, this is where we can have the biggest impact and create a positive message for our consumers. And so what we've seen is that almost all major actors in this space are somewhere along this kind of scale of awareness and action to address sustainability and chemistry challenges. And where it starts is it starts with this kind of, someone comes to them with a chemical challenge, like, why do you have perfluorinated chemicals in your rain jacket? And they're like, wait, what do you mean? What's the problem? And they get the science back and they find out, okay, yes, these things are used, and we need to figure out which ones are responsible and which ones we shouldn't allow into our supply chain. And so they move from awareness and transparency to developing restricted substance lists. And restricted substance lists are a great starting place for large brands to kind of clean up legacy pollutants, to move away from the worst chemistry. And it's really kind of the work that's been done in the last 5 to 10 years to lay the groundwork for what is now exciting and going on in the innovation space, which is now you have people trying to compete not only to remove the bad stuff, which is the restricted substance lists, but how do you get to preferred substances? How do you get to giving credit for doing the right thing, for using processes and chemicals that are aligned with the 12 principles of green chemistry? And all the way at the far end of kind of being willing to tackle this issue and looking at innovation, you have brands that are really redesigning and launching new materials, new types of apparel that are built, like we said earlier, from the ground up with this idea of, we're going to use not only not the bad stuff, but we're going to use the best stuff and be able to differentiate in the marketplace to our consumer about how we're doing the right thing. And so it's great to work within a sector like textile and apparel, and I would similarly say formulated products, where people have clearly moved fairly far down this path, and are willing to really share information and share resources. And so this is the slide, it was a little bit out of order, but that I was referring to earlier, and this just shows you kind of some of the steps within the textile and apparel sector and where all of those chemicals are used. And it's fun to dig into with folks who've been in this industry for years and learn where things get used and why, and why substituting them may or may not be something that's very easy to do. But I want to get to how we know. So if you're a brand or you're an investor like we are, one of the things that is extremely important is that we're choosing alternatives. We're choosing chemicals, materials, products for the future that are really better than the stuff that's already come before us. So these are four very well-respected groups within the textile apparel industry who all have restricted substance lists or manufacturing restricted substance lists. So lists of chemicals that can't be used within the manufacturing process or in the final garment. And when you look at these along with a firm and a few others that are out there, there's roughly each of them has a few hundred to 1,000 chemicals on them. And it's really, I encourage this for the educators out there to take a look at some of these lists because it's a fascinating experiment to think about as a chemist. All right, what are these chemicals? What classes of chemicals are represented within this group of, say, 1,000 or so restricted chemicals? What groups are present? And kind of what themes do they have? And how does this help us think about avoiding regrettable substitution in the future? And so when I took a look, and Adrian and I took a look at all of this list and talked to folks within the industry about where they're used and what function they provide, we narrowed it down to kind of a group that you can find in our report of 46 kind of distinct chemical classes, groups of chemicals you should think about. And then really for the chemists, even simplified it a little bit further. And the reason why I bring this up is because I know within the green chemistry community, there's always a desire to think more about how we teach toxicology, how we teach kind of designing safer chemicals from the get-go. And what's nice is when you start with something like this restricted substance list and start looking for the themes, you start seeing things pop up. And they relate back to mechanisms of action for toxicity. They relate back to things that we should be teaching our young chemists to think about. Not to never use amines or never use halogenated chemicals or metals or monomers. It's not that I want to ban these classes, but when you look within textiles, almost all the chemicals that are on those restricted substance lists fall into one or more of these kind of chemical categories. And it's important to think about when I'm evaluating or when we're evaluating an alternative chemistry that's going to be safer, to think about, does it have some of these things? First, does it have anything that's on the restricted substance list? And the answer to that better be no. But more importantly, looking forward, does it contain primary amines or aromatic amines that we know have tended to be a real problem both in dyes as well as other kind of breakdown materials? Does it contain any halogenated chemicals, which have been used in a number of different applications, or heavy metals, right? Because not all of them are restricted to equal degrees. And so I think it's really important that this is how we get beyond avoiding bad chemistry and get towards designing preferred chemistry. It's by, as chemists, thinking about where are the areas where I would demand more information. So like I said, none of these are things that I would ever want to ban. They're all too broad of categories to want to take them all out, but these are areas where, as a green chemist, my little flag goes up, my little red flag goes up and says, I'm going to dig deeper if you're using these sort of chemicals, and make sure not only that they're not on restricted substance lists, but that they're not likely to cause harm, and maybe look for some additional health data when it's available. So like I said, all of that kind of analysis of those chemicals, as well as some highlighting startups that we came across in the textile and apparel sector, are all highlighted in this report, which you can download from our website. And so now I'll give you some of the highlights, knowing what the context is for what large companies are doing, what chemicals of concern are being phased out, and what we'd like in terms of preferred chemistry. Let's highlight some of the functions that we've seen. So within the sector, these are kind of the 5 functions and some of the sub-functions and categories that we're looking for. These are all areas that are clearly articulated needs, and I'll give you some examples of why, and some of the awesome work that's going on within the sector. And so a great example of a place where harmful chemicals are used is leather. And it's true for both natural leathers as well as your synthetic leather replacements, so your polyurethane or polyvinyl chloride leather replacements. There are a number of chemicals that are absolutely still used today and used today in large quantities to produce this durable, attractive, non-woven material that we find in almost many of our shoes, as well as handbags and jackets and pants and everything else. But leather is a huge industry, and is also one of, when it comes to kind of legacy chemicals of concern, things like chromium, one of the largest polluting materials that we see widely used. And so while you can think about ways, and we've certainly looked at ways to improve, so move away from chromium as a tanning agent and move back towards your phenols and other bio-based tanning agents, tannins that were originally used. Sometimes those are practical, sometimes they aren't. But one of the things that, from a startup perspective, is always useful is you have the ability, back to this slide, to go where the incumbents won't. So if you're a large leather producer today, it's very hard for you to think about, well, what else could we use that would be an attractive, durable, non-woven good for handbags and shoes and things like that. But if you're a startup, you don't have all of that capital and experience already rooted in doing something in one way. So you're really open to look at new ways to provide the function of leather, which is a durable, attractive, non-woven material that can be incorporated into fashion and into materials. So one of the things we highlighted in the section around new materials are replacements for leather. So all of these, rather than replacing chromium as a tanning agent or moving away from the chlorinated preservatives used in the hide preparation, this is one of the areas that has caught a lot of attention. This is some of the 16 companies that we saw making alternative leathers. And what's awesome about this is you can see they're starting from completely different places, using everything from fish skin to pineapple fibers and mushrooms, mycelium to grow an alternative type of leather, to all the way back to synthetic biology like Geltor and Modern Meadow, who are using the modification of either yeast or E. coli to produce a gelatin, which is the same thing that basically makes up the protein networks that are in leather. Make that in a test tube and then turn it back into a leather-like material. And so this is this is what's so inspiring to me. And if you think about it, each of these materials, just like cowhide or other hides, are going to take their own set of chemistry. So just switching the material doesn't guarantee that you're only going to use safe chemistry, but what it does do is it gives you a new starting place. And often if your whole point is to differentiate and make a non-animal product, make a safer and more sustainable leather that you want to use, you're going to be wanting the safest and most sustainable chemistry to process it as well. And so oftentimes by taking that more radical functional approach, looking for alternative materials rather than just a replacement for the bad stuff, you open up both a lot of excitement because you're doing things that haven't been done before, as well as the opportunity to build materials and supply chains from the bottom up that are actually inherently better. And there's always this tension, and that I'll allude to here and elsewhere, between doing something that's completely new and doing something that can be adopted by the supply chain within a reasonable timeline. I think that is the biggest challenge that we see in this area of textile and apparels. How do you do something new that can also make it into the supply chain and make it into the hands of the customers in a reasonable timeline? So another key area for us that has a lot of great work going on, like I mentioned, there's this push to reduce water consumption, and you can see where in the kind of the production of textiles you use the most water, which is both in fabric production and dyeing, as well as significant amounts in fabric finishing. And with dyeing and finishing being some of the areas that are most related to putting chemistry onto fibers, right? So fabric production, also very relevant and important for reducing water consumption there, both in things like growing cotton and other places, but less relevant for chemistry. And of course, boilers for steam, again, a little less relevant for chemistry, since that's energy production. That's basically keeping the dye and finishing baths hot. So, when the overlap between the water challenge and the safer chemistry challenge is really in this area of dyeing and fabric finishing. And similar to the leather challenge, we see another number of companies that are addressing either dyeing or finishing or both, often using either new technology, things like supercritical CO2, which has always been a favorite research area for green chemistry, or going with different chemical treatments that will allow you to reduce the use of water and increase the uptake of dye. So things like the catenization of cotton, which is basically, and this is a great example of something that reduces water, but you have to be careful on the chemistry, is catenizing cotton. You're basically reacting amines with the hydroxyl groups of the cellulose so that it takes up dye much better. And one of the challenges has been the chemicals used in that process have been very, very harmful. So that process on its own isn't necessarily a safer chemistry target, but looking for the new companies that have safer catenization technologies, safer aminization technologies, is a great example of this overlap between fundamental chemistry and the need for function, in this case, uptake of dye, reduce of water use within the industry. Similarly, there's been a real push for finding better ways to bind things to fibers, right? And this is all about chemistry, whether it's companies like MTIX or AppJet. Those are both plasmas that allow you to bind new types of chemistry to fiber using covalent bonds and a high energy way. Unfortunately, of course, creating stable plasmas at atmospheric pressure is quite challenging. And while both of those companies do have commercial and pilot level facilities, it's still very expensive to get those adopted within the supply chain. Another one that I'd highlight here because it's one of the coolest chemistries, and also a different way to think about binding is Green Theme International, which has a waterless way to basically directly bond the finishing agents in their case, but potentially in the future dyes as well, to the fibers. So instead of thinking about this as how do I bond single molecules of dye to the fiber, they've reframed the problem to say, how could we create a platform where we could directly polymerize things onto the surface of the fiber, therefore creating a much more durable finishes while still providing function. And this is what I love. Even within this sector of reducing water, you see many different chemistries, many different processes being used, each with their own advantages and disadvantages within the sector. So the last example that I'll highlight here, and there's many more as you saw highlighted in the actual report, is recycling, because this is another place for chemistry to have a big impact in the near to medium term. So right now, you basically have two options for recycling fibers. One is the mechanical process, which basically takes your input fibers. You pretty much have to have a clean stream of fibers. So either just cotton or just polyester or just elastane, but you shred them up and then you take those short fibers and spin them into new yarns that can be used. The problem is, as with other mechanical recycling methods, as you shred these into smaller and smaller pieces and make them back into yarns, they're not going to be as strong as the yarns that you started with. So you always lose a fair amount of the mechanical properties of the yarns and the strength of the fibers. And you also, mechanical processing doesn't deal with this issue of having many different dyes and finishing chemistries used. And so it's hard to get, the control over color or finishes using mechanical methods. And so the other approach that people are exploring with increasing interest is how could you take either post-industrial, i.e. Kind of garment waste that's fairly clean, or post-consumer, literally your t-shirt at the end of the day, and use chemical methods to both separate the various inputs like polyester and cotton, as well as then respin them or reprocess them in ways that make them much more similar to the virgin fibers that were used. And so this is another area where we've seen companies, especially in the space of cotton, doing a lot of interesting things to re-explore old rayon and pencil chemistry and look for ways to apply that to post-consumer cotton. We've also seen some interesting work being done in the either enzymatic or other catalytic degradation of polyester fibers back into monomers that can be polymerized into virgin PET. That's a growing thing in the PET, the polyester market as well. Like I said earlier, the biggest challenges, so these are all inspiring examples, the biggest challenge here is finding things that will actually work within a reasonable time frame within the industry. And this is another reason why it's critical that people who are doing innovation are having the same sorts of discussions that Safer Made is with these different stakeholders. And here's some examples, and we talk about this further in the report, of places where you can get this information. Other both venture funds who work like we do, or accelerators and incubators who their real role in this ecosystem is to get people up to speed within the sector, right? So doing something like Going to Fashion for Good, which is an excellent accelerator and incubator, gives you connections to all of the folks that are in the industry and helps you think about both the impact of your chemistry as well as how you might scale it. So what I want to spend my last 5 or 10 minutes is talking to you about finance and really what how Safer Made works in venture capital, in particular in venture capital, a little bit more broadly. You know, one of my big transitions from academia to finance, I was never an MBA guy, but that really got me over the fence is thinking about what is the role of money or finance within our society and with how we function. And when you boil it down, it's really deciding what the future looks like. Whether you're talking about the stock market or doing what we do, which is early stage finance, it's basically providing money to companies and people so that they can do something in the future. And this is why it's so critically important to think about, oh, we need folks like Safer Made and others to be funding the future of better chemistry. Because if we're not funding it, it's not going to happen. And so we sit, you know, in this world of, you know, at the intersection of traditional business and social enterprises, where everything we're doing is saying we know that there's a market demand for this safer chemistry. We see that that's going on. So how do we support the companies that can both make money by replacing harmful chemicals with safer chemicals? That's really our goal. And that's how we fit into this, you know, this world of a for-profit but socially motivated, environmentally motivated enterprise. And it's something that, you know, we should all think about with our own finances and where we put our money, because where we put our money is what is the future that we're going to get. So just a little bit about, you know, the overview of a generic venture capital process, which is very similar to ours, and kind of a few words of advice along the way, which is that we talk to hundreds of companies, and that's critical because it gives us an idea of the landscape, similar to what I just did for you in textiles, a landscape of what's going on. And a lot of those companies we're never going to invest in. Of those hundreds of companies, we're only going to invest in a few every year. And so a lot of it is a very cyclical process of us going back and forth and learning and spending time. In a lot of ways, if you think about an investor is another part of the team you're building. And so there has to be a fit in between the investor and the company that works very well. And so we spend a lot of time learning and getting to know the companies that we're going to work with before we invest. And one of the things that I like about that is that it also gives us a chance to have an impact and influence safer chemistry, even in companies that we don't end up investing in. So I don't have a ton of time left, but these are the two companies we have already invested in, and we'll be investing in a few more this year. And they're both good examples of how safer chemistry is being used to differentiate to the consumer. So the first case of Ecologic, they produce a paper bottle that eliminates plastic. They create a beautiful package that sits in a sea of plastic, and are being used by brands like Seventh Generation and L'Oreal to communicate this message of safety and sustainability. Also, a new, more of a technology-driven chemical company, consumer product company, Mimic Guy, who has a safe and effective alternative to DEET, and is actually bringing to market a whole line of personal insect repellents that are just as effective as DEET, but are derived from or use the molecule 2,1-decanone, which is was originally found in the wild tomato plant, to provide its efficacy. That molecule is actually a flavor and fragrance molecule, so we know that it's safe on skin and actually even in our body. And it is just as good at repelling both ticks and mosquitoes. And there's some of my friends who tried it out with me on a recent camping trip said it also doesn't give you that feeling of sickness and toxic chemicals when you put it on, because it has a nice scent. So, you know, this is an example of a new technology out of NC State that's actually creating a brand around it so that it can come to market and make an impact. So just like I said about us, it's Adrian and I are the two partners here at Safer Made, Adrian having more experience on the finance side, but being an excellent and inquisitive chemist in his own right, scientist in his own right. We're still out raising our fund. So we've started making investments as of last year, but a lot of what we're doing is out there telling folks like the few people who've already invested about what we're doing and how this is the future that we'd like to create, and finding people who want to join us on that journey. And so that we still have some time for questions, I'll leave it there and really say that, this has been a great journey for me from academia and the bench and the classroom to finance, to really recognize that we need the educators and scientists that are able to do this sort of work. We need the advocates and regulators who are setting the floor and making sure we're moving in the right direction. We need the big businesses to do their part, evaluate new technologies, partner with young startups. And we need capital to make this all possible. And that's, a real honor to now kind of have touched a number of those different sectors and hopefully help catalyze them working together to create a safer future. So with that, I'll thank you and answer any questions before Amy cuts me off.
Marty, that's wonderful. It's so wonderful to hear, from you all that you've been doing. So wonderfully said, and I think there's some really great nuggets in there, or huge, really big nuggets for use in the education community as well. So we've got a mixture of questions that have come in, as you can imagine, from the mixture of here. I'm going to show my screen here for a second. And then what we've got for questions here coming in are, what resource would you recommend to learn comprehensively about functional substitution? And this is specific to chemicals used in the cleaning products and health and beauty. And so I think he's looking for specific chemicals and their function and how to substitute them in relation to those sectors.
Yeah, so in some ways, formulated products, cleaning and beauty, it can be a little bit more straightforward than textiles, because they're basically just mixtures of the functional chemicals along with carriers and solvents and some other things in a bottle. And so what I would recommend in terms of thinking about functional substitution within that sector is focusing on some of the key functions that are provided. So surfactant action, pH stabilization, chelating, builders and kind of thickening agents, and then the solvents, which is a broad category. Thinking about what they play in the formulation, so the resources there, and maybe I could follow up with an email, are really the basics of formulation, which aren't often taught in undergraduate chemistry courses, but things like Henry's Law and solvent parameters help you think about what the function is that you're trying to provide and look at a wider range of chemical alternatives in this case, as well as in some cases new packaging or new kind of design that could also fill some of those functions.
Great. We had a question about very specific one of your slides. Does the 700 gallons, this is with the water,
yeah.
Does that account for cotton growth and all other inputs or just the processing?
Yeah, the 700 gallon estimate, which is from Textile Exchange, they're a great nonprofit that works in this space. That absolutely includes the growth of cotton or other fibers. It's not a perfect number. It's mostly, that in particular is most relevant for, say, a typical cotton or cotton poly blend t-shirt. But it gives you a nice starting point to get a sense of the scale.
Great. Okay. We have a couple nice comments. Thank you. Oops, Sorry, I thought I got that one here. Okay, sorry about that. I think I just deleted a question. I apologize. If you had a question, a burning question, please resubmit it. I'm not sure which one I deleted. Okay, how would you advise? Okay, so this is related to the function as well. But how would you advise chemistry students and faculty to better design chemical products with environmental and human health and function in mind?
Yeah, and so this is my most concrete piece of advice is to talk to folks within the sector that you want to work in. So if you're making something that you think it would be a good textile finishing agent, or would be a good, say, sunscreen active agent, like you should be talking to very early in that process the people at companies or consultants in this space who've done that work before, because they're the ones that understand what function and how it will have to work in the end. So I think on the function side of things, my biggest piece of advice is talk to people who are already doing similar things in the business world. They're the ones that are going to get you a long ways ahead in terms of what are the most important functional parameters. In terms of the health and safety, they may not, it's not the same resources you're going to go to. In terms of the health and safety, my biggest piece of advice is to take a class approach to think about, all right, what are the class of chemicals that's being, say, avoided for one reason or another, or classes within a sector, and how do I develop things that aren't within that class but still have similar physical and chemical properties. I think what happens when we just say, oh, I don't want bad chemical like bisphenol A, then you get without any more information get a very similar molecule like bisphenol S, which in fact does have similar physical chemical properties, but it's still in that class of bisphenols that's likely to bind to the estrogen receptor. So that's my advice on safer chemistry design, is take a class approach.
Yeah, that's a great advice. This might be a good, oh yes, this was thank you for resubmitting it. This is the one I missed. What is the prospect of using green chemistry in the pharma sector?
Yeah, so this is something I didn't talk about too much, but I think there's a lot of green chemistry, and a fair amount of green chemistry that is already being used. It's in pharma and in chemical production that focuses on reducing waste, increasing yields, right? So green chemistry that's focused on catalysis, on industrial operations, they're not something we look at Safer Made so much, but there's still a lot of work going on because the incentives are aligned. If you can, reduce the number of steps it takes and reduce the amount of, byproducts or materials that you're using in making an active drug molecule, then that's going to be a benefit to the bottom line of the company. Now, incorporating that into the research and development process is an internal challenge that comes in, works out differently at different large companies I've talked to. But the reality is there is that desire there, and I think there are a lot of tools within green chemistry to improve those processes. We don't look so much at that because it's not the consumer that's driving that. It's really process efficiency that is driving those sort of things. And that's a great driver as well, but it's not as good of a fit with the venture capital model. It's going to be partnerships and JDAs and joint development agreements with researchers that are going to move the needle there. Whereas venture capital focusing on the consumer is a better fit for that type of funding.
Yeah, makes sense. I think this is probably a good one to close on here. We have, what is next? This has been a great focus on the textile industry. Are you planning on doing something similar for other sectors? So I'm sure that's a lot of work, right?
Exactly. It's a lot of work, but we think it's beneficial to share some of this knowledge. So we have informal versions of this in the other sectors that we have sort of internal to Safer Made. But our next kind of external report we've identified is going to be in food packaging. It's an area where we're seeing a lot of activities similar to textiles, where a lot of brands, large brands, are coming out and making, audacious claims around what they're going to do next in terms of reducing plastic waste, in terms of moving the more sustainable materials. And it's also another one where there's a real desire for health, right? So if you don't want to have beautiful organic food that is then put into a paperboard full of perfluorinated chemicals, so that you get a dose of Teflon-like chemistry with your hamburger, right? Your grass-fed hamburger patty. So it's another one where there's a lot of interest. I think there's an importance to bring the chemistry part of it into the discussion, and we're going to be releasing that report as soon as possible. But hopefully we'll be talking about it later this year and releasing it sometime early next year.
Wonderful. Keep an eye out. All right. Thank you so much, Marty. This has been wonderful. Wonderful presentation, giving us some really great ideas and understanding more about your world and sort of all the different pieces that are going to help to advance green chemistry, because that's ultimately the goal here. So thank you so much, Marty. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please check out our upcoming webinars. And feel free to sign up for our newsletter to be notified about any upcoming. Oh, and we also have Sean Farrar as our textbook winner. So you'll be getting an email. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.